The alarm systems screamed across every defense station orbiting Earth. Captain Jiwoo stood on the bridge of the UN's horizon, her eyes fixed on the viewscreen, showing something humanity had never seen before. 300 massive ships materialized at the edge of the solar system, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. They hung in space like predators, dark and silent. Waiting. Jiwoo's communications officer, Dayun, turned from her station with wide eyes. "Captain, we're receiving a transmission. It's directed at Earth's United Nations, but they're broadcasting it to every ship, every station, every settlement in the system. They want everyone to hear this." "Put it through," Jiwoo said calmly, though her heart hammered in her chest. She had commanded the horizon for 3 years, fought off pirates, protected colonies, but nothing had prepared her for this moment. The viewscreen flickered and changed. A being appeared, tall and imposing, with 4 arms and skin that seemed to shimmer like oil on water. His eyes glowed with an amber light that suggested intelligence far older than humanity itself. He wore elaborate armor decorated with symbols that spoke of countless victories. Behind him stood others of his kind, all watching with expressions of complete certainty. "I am Emperor Valtros, the Eternal, ruler of the Calrith Empire," the being said. His voice came through the translators with perfect clarity, cold and absolute. "For 8,000 years, my empire has brought order to this galaxy. We have unified 47 species under our rule. We have brought peace through strength. We have eliminated chaos through control." Jiwoo noticed her weapons officer, Bora, gripping her console so hard her knuckles turned white. Around the bridge, her crew stood frozen, listening to words that would change everything. "Humanity," the Emperor continued, "you have achieved faster than light travel. You have begun to spread beyond your home system. This makes you visible to the galaxy. This makes you subject to galactic law. And galactic law is simple. Submit to the Calrith Empire, or cease to exist." The Emperor paused, letting his words sink in. Jiwoo could imagine the panic spreading across Earth right now. In the halls of government, in military command centers, in homes where families watched this broadcast and realized their lives would never be the same. "These are our terms," Valtra said, raising one hand. "Within 72 hours, Earth will surrender all military assets to Calrith control. Your ships, your weapons, your defense stations, everything. Second, humanity will provide 30% of your population as labor conscripts. They will serve the Empire in various capacities across our territories. Third, Earth will become a client world, governed by Calrith administrators, subject to Calrith law." Jiwoo felt her stomach twist, but she kept her face neutral. Around her, she heard sharp intakes of breath, whispered curses. Dayun's hand moved to her mouth in shock. Biora looked like she wanted to fire every weapon the horizon carried at those distant ships. "If you refuse these generous terms," the Emperor said, and now his voice carried something that might have been amusement, "my armada will sterilize your world. We will reduce Earth to ash. Your colonies will be hunted down and eliminated. Humanity will become a cautionary tale told to other species who consider defiance. You have 72 hours to decide. Choose wisely." The transmission ended. The view screen returned to showing the fleet of alien warships, waiting like an executioner's blade hanging over humanity's neck. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then every communication channel exploded with noise. Military channels, civilian broadcasts, colony networks, all of them carrying the same message: panic, confusion, fear. and desperate questions about what would happen next. Jiwoo turned to her tactical officer, a young man named Young Jae. Analysis. Can we fight them? Young Jae pulled up data on his screens, numbers and projections that made his face go pale. Captain, our entire fleet is maybe 60 capital ships. They have 300. Their smallest ships are 3 times the size of the horizon. Their energy signatures suggest weapons we can't match and shields we can't penetrate. If we engage them, we'd be destroyed in minutes. So we can't win, Jiwoo said quietly. Not conventionally. No, Young Jae confirmed. On Earth, the United Nations Security Council convened an emergency session. Jiwoo watched the feed on a secondary screen as politicians argued. Some wanted to negotiate, to ask for better terms. Some wanted to surrender immediately and hope for mercy. Some wanted to evacuate as many people as possible to hidden colonies and try to preserve some fragment of humanity in the dark. Between stars, Admiral Taeyang, the highest-ranking officer in Earth's defense forces, appeared on Jiwoo's private channel. The old man looked tired, older than his 70 years. Captain Jiwoo, I'm ordering all military vessels to fall back to defensive positions around Earth. Do not engage the enemy fleet under any circumstances. We're going to have to accept their terms. Permission to speak freely, Admiral. Jiwoo asked Taeyang, nodded wearily. Go ahead, Captain. If we surrender, those people they're taking as labor conscripts will be slaves. 30% of humanity means over 1 billion people. Sir, children, families, they'll be scattered across an empire we know nothing about, doing work we can't imagine, with no hope of ever coming home. I know, Taeyang said, and his voice cracked slightly. But what choice do we have? If we fight, everyone dies. At least this way, most of humanity survives. Jiwoo stared at the alien fleet on her view screen. 300 ships against 60. Technology centuries more advanced. An empire that had conquered 47 other species. The math was simple. The choice seemed obvious, but something burned in her chest. Something that wouldn't accept the simple choice. Admiral, I request direct communication with Emperor Valtros. Taeyang frowned. What? Why? Captain, we can't antagonize them. We're trying to negotiate surrender terms that won't result in complete extermination. I understand, sir. But before we surrender, before we accept slavery for 1 billion people, I want to ask them one question. Just one. If they refuse to answer it, I'll follow your orders without hesitation. The Admiral studied her face for a long moment. Finally, he nodded. I'll arrange it. But Jiwoo, don't make things worse. We're hanging by a thread here. 20 minutes later, Dayun received a response. The Calrith had agreed to a brief communication. Emperor Veltros himself would speak with the human. Captain Jiwoo's crew gathered around her as the transmission connected. Once again, the Emperor's face appeared on the view screen, now showing mild curiosity. A human captain wishes to speak with me, Veltros said. How unusual. Your leaders have not yet responded to our terms. Have you come to announce your surrender? Jiwoo stood straight, meeting the Emperor's glowing eyes without flinching. When she spoke, her voice was steady and cold. Before you commit your forces, Emperor, before you point all those ships at my home and everyone I've ever loved, I have one question. Have you researched what humans do when cornered? For the first time, the Emperor's expression changed. The certainty flickered. Behind him, his advisors stirred, exchanging glances. It was subtle, barely noticeable, but Jiwoo saw it. Doubt, the tiniest seed of doubt. Emperor Veltros studied her for a long moment. And then the transmission ended without another word. Jiwoo turned to her crew. Implement Prometheus Protocol. All hands to stations. We have 72 hours to teach the Calrith Empire a lesson they'll never forget. The bridge of the UN's horizon hummed with activity as Jiwoo pulled up classified files on her personal console. Prometheus Protocol. She had hoped never to use it, had prayed humanity would never be desperate enough to need it. But desperation had arrived in the form of 300 alien warships, and hope was a luxury Earth could no longer afford. Her second officer, Hay-1, appeared at her shoulder. Captain, the Prometheus files are restricted. I need your authorization to review them. Jiwoo entered her command codes and watched as Hay-1's face went pale while reading. Captain, these protocols violate every rule of civilized warfare. The Geneva Conventions, the Lunar Accords, every treaty we've signed about acceptable military conduct. Those treaties were written for wars between humans, Jiwoo said quietly. The Calrith want to enslave 1 billion of our people. They've given us 3 days to choose between chains and extinction. Civilization is a luxury we can't afford right now. Hay-1 stared at her. Who are we if we do this? Alive, Jiwoo answered. We're alive. And that's enough. As her crew began implementing the protocol, Jiwoo's mind drifted back 20 years to Mars Colony, to the year everything changed for her. She had been 12 years old, living with her parents in a research facility on Mars. Her father, Sang-hoon, worked as a geologist. Her mother, Mi-young, was a botanist, developing crops for Martian soil. Life was simple, peaceful, until the day the Meridian Corporation decided peace wasn't profitable enough. The corporation owned the mining rights to Mars. They also employed private security forces. And they decided that independent colonists cost too much in safety regulations and fair wages. Their solution was simple. Convert everyone to indentured labor. Anyone who refused would be expelled from the colony to die in the thin Martian atmosphere. Jiwoo remembered her father standing in their small living quarters, holding an improvised weapon made from mining equipment. They think we'll surrender because they have guns and we have rock hammers, he'd said. They don't understand that we chose to live on Mars. We're already the kind of people who do impossible things. The Red Dust Rebellion lasted 6 months. The corporation had better weapons, more soldiers, and supply lines from Earth. The colonists had desperation, creativity, and an absolute refusal to surrender. They turned the colony's infrastructure into weapons. They used the mining tunnels as traps. They sabotaged equipment, poisoned supplies, and made every victory cost the corporation more than they could afford to pay. In the end, the corporation withdrew, not because the colonists won militarily, but because the cost of winning became unbearable. Jiwoo's father had taught her the most important lesson of that war. You don't need to be stronger than your enemy. You just need to make victory too expensive for them to pay. Her mother had taught her something else. Mi-young had developed a fungus that ate through the corporation's protective suits, making the Martian environment deadly for them, while colonists in older, simpler suits remained safe. Biology doesn't care about military strength, her mother had explained. It just spreads, adapts, and survives. Both her parents died in the final battle of the rebellion, killed by corporate soldiers during the last desperate assault. But their lessons lived on in their daughter. A message arrived from Earth. Intelligence Officer Unicio had compiled everything humanity knew about the Calrith Empire from the transmission, from long-range scans, and from the vast database of galactic information they'd collected since achieving faster-than-light travel. Jiwoo. Read the report with growing understanding. The Calrith Empire had ruled for 8,000 years. They had conquered 47 species. Their military doctrine was simple and effective. Overwhelming force applied precisely. They fought by the numbers, using superior technology and larger fleets to crush any opposition. But there was something else in the report, something hidden between the lines. Every species the Calrith had conquered fought conventionally. They engaged in space battles, lost, and then surrendered. Not one of the 47 species had waged asymmetric warfare. Not one had refused to accept defeat. Not one had made the Calrith pay a price that lasted beyond the initial conquest. "They've never fought humans before," Giwu said aloud. Young Jay looked up from his tactical station. "Captain." The Calrith Giwu explained, pulling up historical files on her view screen. "Look at their conquest record. Every species surrendered after losing the first major battle. The longest resistance lasted 3 weeks. They think warfare is about strength versus strength, fleet against fleet, superior technology winning decisively." "That's not wrong," young Jay said, carefully. "That is how most wars work." Giwu smiled grimly. "Most wars between civilized species. But humans, we've been fighting each other for 10,000 years. We invented total war. We created strategies like scorched earth, where you burn your own land rather than let enemies use it. We developed guerrilla tactics, suicide attacks, biological warfare, psychological operations, and dozens of other ways to fight when we're outmatched." She pulled up Earth's military history. Thousands of years of human conflicts displayed in brutal detail. Every dirty trick, every ruthless strategy, every way to make winning so costly that victory becomes meaningless. We learned it fighting ourselves. The Calrith have advanced technology, but we have something they've never encountered. We're a species that refuses to accept defeat, even when defeat is certain. On Earth, Professor Ki-1 and Dr. Yoon-ji worked frantically in a secret military facility. They were the architects of Prometheus Protocol, and now they watched their theoretical plans become terrible reality. Ki-1 had studied military history his entire life. Young-ji had developed artificial intelligence systems that could coordinate complex operations across interstellar distances together. They had created a protocol for the unthinkable, how to fight an unwinnable war. The protocol didn't aim for military victory. It aimed for something darker. It was designed to make conquering humanity so costly, so exhausting, so resource-draining that any empire would eventually calculate that enslaving humans cost more than they were worth. Phase 1 was already in motion. Every human military vessel was being fitted with black box recorders that would document everything about Calrith technology, weapons, tactics, and ship designs. When those ships were destroyed in the coming battle, they would transmit all that data to hidden relay stations scattered across remote star systems. Phase 2 involved stealth teams led by Special Forces operative Subin. Small ships, invisible to Calrith sensors, were already departing Earth, carrying operatives who would infiltrate Calrith supply lines, not to attack, but to observe, to learn, to plant microscopic trackers on every supply vessel they could reach. Phase 3 was the longest game. Hidden across hundreds of uninhabited star systems, automated factories were beginning production. They would build ships, weapons, and equipment slowly, invisibly, using designs that copied nothing from human technology. When they finally revealed themselves, the Calrith would face an enemy they thought they'd already defeated. Jiwoo received a priority message from Earth. Admiral Taeyang wanted an explanation for the unusual orders being issued to ships across the fleet. She recorded her response carefully. Admiral Prometheus' protocol operates on one principle. We cannot defeat the Calrith in conventional warfare, so we won't fight conventionally. When they attack, we'll lose quickly. But losing the battle is part of the plan. Every ship they destroy will teach us more about them. Every occupation they establish will give us opportunities to spread resistance. Every day they control Earth will cost them resources they can't afford to waste forever. She paused, choosing her next words carefully. The Calrith have given us an ultimatum: surrender or die. But there's a third option they haven't considered. We can surrender and fight anyway. We can accept occupation and make it so costly they'll wish they'd exterminated us. We can turn every captured human into a lesson other species will learn. The lesson is simple. Some enemies cost too much to conquer. Back on Mars, in the colony where Jiwoo had learned these lessons, a memorial stood for those who died in the Red Dust Rebellion. Her parents' names were carved there, along with 300 others. Below the names was a quote from her father, recorded the day before he died. They came with guns to take our freedom. We gave them a war they couldn't afford to win. Jiwoo stood on her bridge, watching the Calrith fleet on the view screen, and whispered the same words her father had spoken. Around her, the crew of the Horizon worked frantically, implementing protocols that would turn humanity's inevitable defeat into something the Calrith Empire would remember for generations. Da-Yoon looked up from her communication station. "Captain, we're receiving requests from colony ships asking for evacuation orders. They want to know if they should run." "Tell them to stay," Jiwoo said. "Tell them to watch, learn, and prepare. This war doesn't end with a battle. It begins with one." Earth's United Nations building in Geneva became the center of a diplomatic theater that both sides knew was meaningless. Ambassador Dong-Hin sat across from Lord Vexter, the Calrith diplomat assigned to accept humanity's surrender. They discussed terms, negotiated details, debated the specifics of how 3 billion humans would become subjects of the Calrith Empire. Every hour of discussion was another hour for Jiwoo's plan to develop. Dong-Hin was perfect for this role. He could talk for hours about nothing, raise concerns about minor details, ask for clarifications that required lengthy responses. The Calrith believed humans were stalling out of fear, trying to delay the inevitable. They were partly right, but fear wasn't the only reason. In space, Captain Subin guided her stealth ship through the outer reaches of the Calrith fleet. The ship was barely larger than a shuttle, coated with materials that absorbed sensor sweeps and made it nearly invisible. Subin had spent 15 years in special operations. She'd infiltrated pirate bases, rescued hostages from terrorist groups, and conducted reconnaissance missions in hostile territory. But this was different. This was the enemy that could destroy humanity with a casual order. Approaching target vessel, her pilot, Jamin, whispered. They didn't need to whisper in the vacuum of space, but something about being this close to alien warships made everyone speak quietly. Subin activated her scanning equipment. The Calrith supply ship was enormous, a floating warehouse that carried food, ammunition, fuel, and spare parts for the fleet. She wasn't here to attack it. She was here to learn from it for 6 hours. Her ship drifted alongside the supply vessel, passive sensors recording everything. How the Calrith organized their logistics, what their ships consumed, how often they needed resupply, where their supply lines extended. Every detail was transmitted back to hidden relay stations, building a picture of an empire's infrastructure. The most valuable discovery came from analyzing their supply manifest. The Calrith fleet consumed enormous amounts of resources. Feeding 300 capital ships and their crews required a logistics chain that stretched across multiple star systems. And according to Subin's calculations, this fleet was operating at the edge of that supply chain. They had enough resources for a quick conquest, but a prolonged occupation would strain their capabilities. Back on Earth, in a secret military facility buried deep underground, Dr. Yunji analyzed the data streaming in from dozens of stealth teams like Subin's. She fed everything into her artificial intelligence systems, building a comprehensive model of the Calrith Empire. What emerged was fascinating and terrifying. The Calrith had perfected the art of efficient conquest. They arrived with overwhelming force, crushed any resistance quickly, and then integrated the conquered species into their empire with remarkable efficiency. Most conquered species eventually accepted their role, contributed to the empire, and even took pride in being part of something larger than themselves. The system worked because the Calrith offered stability, protection, and a place in a successful civilization. Species that resisted initially eventually saw the benefits of cooperation. The Calrith weren't cruel conquerors. They were efficient administrators, but efficiency had a weakness. The system only worked if conquered species eventually accepted their place. It relied on compliance, on the conquered people deciding that resistance cost more than cooperation. They've never met a species that doesn't do math the same way, Yunji said to Professor Kiwon, who stood beside her reviewing the data. Kiwon nodded slowly. The Calrith calculate costs and benefits. They determine that the cost of continued resistance exceeds the benefits of freedom, so they surrender. Logical, rational, civilized. But humans don't always think that way, Yunji continued. Sometimes we fight, even when the math says we should surrender. Sometimes we value freedom more than survival. Sometimes we're willing to pay any cost for revenge. Kiwon pulled up historical files. The siege of Leningrad, where humans endured starvation rather than surrender. The Warsaw Uprising, where outmatched resistance fighters battled against impossible odds. The numerous examples throughout history of humans choosing death over submission. The Calrith think warfare is rational. They're about to learn it's not. On the horizon, Giwu reviewed reports from across human space. The 72-hour deadline was approaching fast. Earth's military forces had positioned themselves in defensive formations that everyone knew were useless. The ships were too few, the weapons too weak, the outcome too certain, but hidden within those formations were layers of deception. Every ship carried black box recorders programmed to transmit combat data. Every vessel had been rigged with emergency broadcast systems that would activate after destruction, sending their final messages to relay stations light years away. The human fleet wasn't preparing to fight. It was preparing to die while teaching humanity everything about its enemy. Young Jae approached Jiwoo's command chair. "Captain, I've completed the analysis you requested. In a straight battle, we'll be destroyed in approximately 18 minutes. The Calrith have superior firepower, better shields, and faster ships. We cannot win," Good Jiwoo said, and Young Jae blinked in confusion. If we could win, the Calrith would bring more ships. But because they know we'll lose quickly, they've committed exactly 300 vessels. They've calculated the minimum force needed for conquest. That's valuable information. She pulled up a star map showing the Calrith Empire's territory. Look at their deployment. Those 300 ships represent a significant percentage of their mobile fleet. Intelligence suggests they maintain occupation forces across 47 worlds, patrol forces along their borders, and strategic reserves for emergencies. By committing 300 ships to conquering Earth, they've weakened their position elsewhere. Are you saying we can exploit that weakness? Young-jae asked. Not yet, Jiwoo admitted. We're not strong enough. But 5 years from now, 10 years, those automated factories we've seeded across uninhabited systems will be producing ships. Those stealth teams, learning about their empire, will have created resistance networks. Those conquered species we're going to teach human tactics will be ready to rebel. The Calrith are deploying 300 ships to conquer 4 billion people. They think that's their biggest deployment. It's actually going to be their biggest mistake. A message arrived from Ambassador Dong. The Calrith were losing patience with negotiations. Lord Vexter had delivered an ultimatum within the ultimatum. Earth had 12 hours remaining to accept surrender terms, or the Calrith fleet would begin its attack. Giwu recorded a message to be broadcast across all human channels. Every ship, every station, every colony needed to hear this. To all human forces, all colonies, all settlements across our space. In 12 hours, the Calrith Empire will attack Earth. We will lose that battle. Our ships will be destroyed. Our defenses will fall. Earth will be occupied. This is not a failure. This is part of the plan. She paused, letting that sink in. The Calrith expects us to surrender after we lose. They expect us to accept occupation, to adapt to their rule, to eventually become willing parts of their empire. Every species they've conquered has followed this pattern. We will not. Instead, we will implement Protocol Cato. Every human who remembers Earth history knows this reference. Cato the Elder ended every speech the same way for years. Carthage must be destroyed. He repeated it constantly until Rome finally did it. We're adopting his strategy. The Calrith Empire must be destroyed. Not tomorrow, not next year, but eventually, inevitably, we will make them regret threatening Earth. This is a declaration of permanent war, not a war of battles and fleets, a war of resistance, sabotage, and gradual erosion. We will make occupation so costly they'll wish they'd never heard of humanity. Every human in Calrith territory will smile, obey, and work toward their downfall. Every day of their rule will cost them more than they gain. Every year will weaken their empire while we grow stronger. Be patient. Be careful. Learn everything about them while revealing nothing about ourselves. And remember, we don't need to defeat 300 warships. We just need to make victory meaningless. That's something humans have always been good at. On Earth, in homes and bunkers, people watched Jiwoo's message with mixed emotions. Some felt hope. Some felt terror. Many felt both. They were about to be conquered by an empire that had never lost. But they were being led by a woman who had no intention of accepting defeat. In the Calrith flagship, Emperor Valtros reviewed his own intelligence reports about humanity. His analysts assured him this conquest would be straightforward. Humans had basic space travel, primitive weapons, and no experience with galactic warfare. The Empire would crush their resistance in hours, occupy their world in days. and integrate them into Calrith civilization within a generation. But Valtros remembered that brief conversation with Captain Jiwoo. Her question echoed in his mind. Have you researched what humans do when cornered? His intelligence officers had investigated. They found humans had fought numerous wars among themselves. Nothing unusual. Most species did that before achieving unity. What bothered Valtros was the pattern. Humans didn't always surrender when outmatched. Sometimes they fought to extinction. Sometimes they won through methods his analysts called disturbing and irrational. Sometimes they turned defeat into something that destroyed the victor along with the vanquished. He pushed the concern aside. Surely humans would be rational. Surely they would see that cooperation offered more benefits than resistance. Surely they would follow the pattern of 47 species before them. In 12 hours, the Calrith Empire would begin teaching humanity its place in the galactic order. Valtros had no way of knowing that humanity was about to teach him something far more valuable. Some species can't be conquered, only contained. And even containment comes at a price too high for empires to pay forever. The deadline expired at exactly 800 hours Universal Time. For a moment, nothing happened. Earth's defense fleet held position in high orbit. The Calrith Armada remained at the edge of the solar system. The entire human species held its breath. Then the Calrith fleet began to move. 300 warships accelerated toward Earth with terrifying precision. They moved in perfect formation, a display of military coordination that humanity had never achieved. War Marshal Throkvert commanded the assault from his flagship, the Eternal Judgment. He had conducted 84 conquest campaigns in his 300 years of service. He had never lost. Today would be no different. Analysis confirms human fleet composition, his tactical officer reported. 60 capital ships, various classes. Estimated combat capability significantly below ours. Predicted engagement time, 14 to 20 minutes. Throkvert nodded. Standard quick conquest. The humans would realize their situation, fire a few desperate shots, and then surrender. Most species did. It was rational, civilized behavior. The human fleet moved to intercept. Captain Jiwoo watched her tactical display as Earth's entire military force positioned itself between their home and the alien armada. She knew what the next 20 minutes would bring. She'd run the simulations 1,000 times. But knowing didn't make it easier. All ships, weapons free, Admiral Taeyang ordered from Earth Command. Make them remember this day. The battle began. Calrith weapons tore through human shields like paper. Energy beams that could cut through asteroids sliced human warships in half. Kinetic projectiles moving at relativistic speeds punched through holes with devastating effect. The human fleet fought back desperately, firing missiles, beam weapons, and kinetic rounds at the advancing armada. Some shots hit. A few Calrith ships took minor damage, but the difference in technology was overwhelming. For every scratch on a Calrith vessel, an entire human ship died. The math was brutal and one-sided. On the horizon, alarms screamed as Calrith weapons found their range. Shields at 40%. Biora called out. Hull breaches on decks 7 and 9. Engineering reports primary power fluctuating. Giwu gripped her command chair. Around her, the bridge crew worked frantically to keep the ship fighting even as it fell apart around them. Dayun, confirm black box transmission is active. Active and broadcasting, Captain, Dayun confirmed. Everything we're experiencing is being recorded and transmitted to Relay Point 7. Another impact rocked the ship. Sparks flew from a console. Young Jay was thrown from his station, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead. He dragged himself back, hands shaking as he tried to read his displays. Captain, 15 human ships destroyed. 23 severely damaged. The fleet is breaking apart. Giwu watched her tactical display. The Calrith weren't even slowing down. They destroyed human vessels with clinical efficiency, treating Earth's defense force as a minor obstacle rather than a real threat. In military terms, it was a massacre. In strategic terms, it was exactly what Prometheus Protocol required. All ships, transmit your data now, Giwu ordered on the fleet-wide channel. Complete your mission. Make them remember every ship they destroyed. Across the battle space, dying human vessels broadcast their final messages. Combat data, tactical analysis, weapon specifications, everything they'd learned in their brief, desperate fight. The transmissions weren't aimed at Earth. They went to hidden relay stations scattered across uninhabited systems, where automated systems would store the information for future use. The UN's Horizon took a direct hit to its main reactor. Power failed across half the ship. Emergency lights flickered on, casting everything in red. Giwu could smell burning electronics and something worse, the smell of the life support systems failing. Captain, we need to evacuate, Haywan said, blood running down her arm from shrapnel wounds. The reactor containment is failing. We have maybe 3 minutes before it goes critical. Begin evacuation, Giwu ordered. All non-essential personnel to escape pods. Haywan, you're in command of survivors. Get them to the lunar rally point. Captain, you need to come too, Haywan protested. I will Giwu lead. I need to complete the data transmission first. Go, that's an order. Haywan stared at her for a moment, then nodded and began directing the evacuation. One by one, Giwu's bridge crew abandoned their stations. Doryun was last, tears streaming down her face. Captain, please, I'll be right behind you, Giwu said gently. I promise. Doryun knew it was a lie, but she went anyway, because orders were orders, and because staying would only mean one more death instead of one sacrifice, alone on the bridge. Giwu worked quickly. She routed all remaining power to the communications array. The black box was still transmitting, still recording, still sending humanity's first encounter with Calrith weapons to those distant relay stations. But there was one more message that needed to go out. One message that would define everything that came after. Mars colony fell next. The Calrith bombardment reduced the orbital platforms to debris. Ground installations were hit with precision strikes. The colony that had taught Giwu how to fight against overwhelming odds was occupied within an hour. Luna. Base surrendered after a brief exchange of fire. Jupiter's shipyards were destroyed before they could launch their incomplete vessels. Saturn's mining facilities were captured intact. Across human space, the Calrith Empire demonstrated exactly why they had conquered 47 species. Within 8 hours of the initial engagement, the battle was over. Earth's defense fleet was gone. Every major military installation was captured or destroyed. Calrith troops were landing on Earth itself, establishing occupation zones in major cities across the globe. Emperor Valtros watched from his command ship as his forces completed the conquest. It had taken longer than expected, not because human resistance was effective, but because there were simply many targets to secure. Still, the result was never in doubt. Humanity was now part of the Calrith Empire. Then he received a transmission from the UN's horizon, which his sensors showed was critically damaged and drifting. From Captain Jiwoo, who should have been dead or captured by now. The transmission was being broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring every human in the solar system could hear it. More importantly, it was being transmitted beyond the solar system, to every hidden relay, every secret colony, every human presence in space. Valtros watched as Jiwoo's face appeared on his viewscreen. She was injured, blood on her face, her uniform torn. Behind her, the bridge of her ship was dark except for emergency lights. She looked like someone who had already lost everything, but her voice was steady. Emperor Valtros, you won this battle. Congratulations. You'll occupy Earth within hours. Your history will record this as another successful conquest. I'm sure it will be celebrated back on your home world. She paused, and something in her expression changed. Something cold and absolutely certain. But let me tell you what happens next. Every human you enslave will smile and obey while learning everything about your empire. Every colony you occupy will secretly teach their children your weaknesses. Every day of peace you experience will cost you resources to maintain while we prepare. In 5 years, small Calrith outposts will start disappearing. In 10 years, your supply convoys will face constant raids. In 20 years, species you conquered centuries ago will rebel, armed with weapons we've smuggled to them. We don't need to defeat your armada. We just need to make conquering humanity the worst decision you've ever made. We will make your empire bleed resources. We will turn your conquests into liabilities. We will inspire every enslaved species to resist. Jiwoo leaned closer to the camera, and now Valtros saw something in her eyes that made him uncomfortable. Not fear, not even hatred. Just absolute commitment to a goal that would outlive her. You have the numbers, the technology, the ships, but we have something you'll never understand. We've been practicing total war against each other for 10,000 years. We know every dirty trick, every asymmetric strategy, every way to make a victory meaningless. So yes, take Earth, enslave us, declare victory. Then spend the next century learning what it means to win a battle against humanity while losing everything that matters. We are patient. We are vindictive. We are creative. And we never, ever forget. Welcome to the long war, Emperor. You just made 4 billion mortal enemies who have nothing left to lose and all the time in the universe to make you regret it. The transmission ended. A moment later, the Horizon's reactor went critical. The ship exploded in a brief, bright flash that was visible from Earth's surface. Asterisk. In the command center of the Eternal Judgment, War Marshal Throkva turned to Emperor Valtros. Sire, the human captain's transmission was obviously desperation. Empty threats from a defeated enemy. We've secured all major population centers. Resistance is minimal. The conquest is complete. But Valtros was reading reports from his intelligence division. During the battle, every human ship had transmitted massive amounts of data before being destroyed. Those transmissions weren't aimed at Earth. They had gone to locations across space that Calrith sensors couldn't track. More concerning were reports from stealth reconnaissance. Human ships, small vessels barely larger than shuttles, had been detected near Calrith's supply lines. They hadn't attacked. They had just observed and then disappeared. And most troubling of all, Calrith long-range sensors had detected unusual energy signatures in remote, uninhabited star systems. Signs of industrial activity in places where nothing should exist. Marshal Throckver Valtros said quietly, "Deploy occupation forces to Earth, standard integration protocol. But also send messages to all our border territories. Increase security. Watch for signs of human activity. And prepare detailed cost analysis of maintaining occupation forces in this system." "Sire, you don't believe the humans' threats?" Throckver asked. Emperor Valtros watched the space where the horizon had exploded. "I believe we just conquered a species that fights in ways we've never encountered. We beat them today. The question is whether we can afford the cost of keeping them beaten tomorrow, next year, and for the next century." He thought of Captain Jiwoo's final words. Patient, vindictive, creative, and never forget, for the first time in 8,000 years of conquest. Emperor Valtros wondered if victory would prove more costly than the battle. 6 months after the conquest, General Macthor stood in what used to be the United Nations building in Geneva, now serving as Calrith's occupation headquarters. He reviewed daily reports with growing frustration. Earth should have been a simple occupation by now. The people should have been accepting their new role in the empire. Instead, every day brought new problems. Another supply depot suffered equipment failures last night, his logistics officer reported. Temperature controls malfunctioned, spoiling 3 weeks of food supplies. Investigation suggests it was simple mechanical failure, but that's the 8th depot this month. Macthor frowned. 8 supply depots, all mechanical failures, all in facilities that had been inspected and approved by Calrith engineers. The pattern was suspicious, but investigators could never find evidence of sabotage. "What about the illness affecting troops in the Asian sector?" he asked. "Medical officer says it's a local pathogen. Earth's biology is different from our normal operating environments. They recommend increased decontamination protocols and limiting contact with local populations." That was the official explanation. But Macthor noticed that illness only affected troops in certain areas, and it always seemed to start after contact with human workers who appeared completely healthy. If it was biological warfare, it was subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. The humans themselves seemed cooperative on the surface. They followed orders, worked in assigned positions, and showed no signs of organized resistance. But cooperation wasn't the same as acceptance. Macthor had occupied 7 worlds in his career. Usually by 6 months, the local population started to relax, to see benefits in Calrith rule, to begin integrating into the empire. Earth's humans smiled, obeyed, and watched everything with quiet, calculating eyes in a basement in Seoul. Former intelligence officer Unicio led a meeting of 17 people. They looked like ordinary workers, people who had accepted their assigned positions in the new order. But twice a week, they gathered in this hidden location to coordinate resistance. "The biological agent is working better than expected," Min-jae reported. He had been a medical researcher before the occupation. Now he developed diseases that affected Calrith physiology while leaving humans untouched. General Macthor's troops think it's just local pathogens. They don't realize we're selectively breeding bacteria that target their specific biology. "Good," Unicio said. "What about the supply sabotage?" "Ongoing," reported Hyjin, who worked in a Calrith supply facility. "We're careful to make it look like equipment failure. A temperature control here, a software glitch there. Nothing big enough to trigger serious investigation. But over months, it adds up. The Calrith are spending twice what they expected on maintaining occupation." Unicio pulled up a star map on a hidden display. "Our network is expanding." We have resistance cells on Mars, Luna, and 3 of Jupiter's moons. More importantly, we've made contact with 2 other conquered species, the Velna and the Torgathy. Both have been under Calrith rule for over a century. Neither had ever considered rebellion until we showed them it was possible. Are we actually teaching aliens how to resist? Minjay asked, surprised. That was always part of the plan, Unisio explained. Captain Jiwoo understood something important. We can't defeat the Calrith Empire alone. But if we can inspire the 47 species they've conquered, if we can spread resistance across their territory, then we make the entire empire too expensive to maintain. Far from Earth, in the Oort cloud, Captain Jiwoo stood on the bridge of a ship that shouldn't exist. The UN's Phoenix was half the size of the horizon, built from materials salvaged from destroyed vessels and new components produced by hidden factories. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She had survived the horizon's destruction by transmitting her consciousness into the escape pod at the last moment. Her bridge crew believing she had died. It was necessary deception. A dead hero inspired more than a living commander, and her death had given resistance movements across human space a martyr to rally around. But she wasn't dead. She was very much alive, leading a small fleet of vessels built in secret, crewed by people who had supposedly died in the initial battle or disappeared during the occupation. Captain, we're receiving a transmission from Captain Subin, reported her new communications officer J. The stealth operation in the Velna system was successful. She's planted tracking devices on 12 Calrith supply vessels. We now have comprehensive data on their logistics network in that entire sector. Giwu studied the intelligence. The Calrith supply chain was vast but surprisingly fragile. It was designed for efficiency, not redundancy. Disrupting one key supply hub could create shortages across multiple systems. That information was valuable for future operations. Engineer Manesio approached with her own report. The automated factories in the Kepler system are now operational. They're producing components for 20 new vessels. Conservative estimate says we'll have a full squadron in 2 years. 2 years. It seemed like forever. But Jiwoo had learned patience on Mars during the Red Dust Rebellion. Wars of resistance weren't won in months. They were won in decades, through accumulated costs that eventually broke even the strongest empire. On the Calrith homeworld, Emperor Veltros convened his council to discuss Earth. 1 year had passed since the conquest. By now, Earth should have been a productive part of the empire, contributing resources and labor like every other conquered world. Instead, it was costing more than it produced. The occupation requires twice the normal troop deployment, Admiral Kreshtar reported. Equipment failures, supply issues, and mysterious illnesses force us to maintain larger forces than standard doctrine recommends. What about integration? Valtros asked. Are the humans accepting Calrith rule? On the surface, yes, Kreshtar admitted. But my intelligence officers report something unusual. The humans comply with orders, but they show none of the acceptance we see in other conquered species. They work efficiently, but they don't embrace their role in the empire. It's as if they're waiting for something. Lord Vexther, who had negotiated Earth's surrender, spoke up. Sire, there's something else. We're receiving reports of unusual activity in systems we conquered decades ago. The Velna have experienced 3 separate rebellions in the past 6 months. The Torgathy are showing signs of unrest. Analysis suggests someone is spreading resistance techniques to these populations. The humans, Valtros said quietly. We have no proof, Vexter said, but the timing is suspicious. These species showed no signs of resistance for over a century. Then we conquer Earth, and suddenly rebellions appear using tactics we've never encountered before. Tactics that seem designed to make occupation costly rather than to win military victories. Valtros pulled up economic reports. The costs were staggering. Maintaining occupation forces on Earth and dealing with unrest across other conquered worlds was draining resources faster than anticipated. The conquest of Earth had cost 300 ships in initial deployment. Now it was costing thousands of soldiers, equipment, and supplies every month. Calculate the total cost of occupying Earth for the next decade, he ordered. His economic advisors worked quickly. The number that came back made the entire council go silent. That's more than we spent conquering the last 5 species combined, Valtros said. Yes, sire, his chief economist confirmed. And that assumes current cost levels remain stable. If human resistance intensifies, or if rebellions spread to more conquered species, costs will increase exponentially. War Marshal Throkfer stood.
Sire, I recommend we implement harsher measures. Public executions, collective punishment, complete military occupation. We can break their resistance if we're willing to pay the immediate cost. And if we do that, Admiral Kreshtar countered, we validate everything the humans said about us. We prove we're an empire that rules through fear and violence. Every other species we've conquered will wonder if they're next. We'll face rebellions across our territory. Valtros realized the trap. If they occupied Earth humanely, humans continued their subtle resistance indefinitely. If they cracked down harshly, they inspired other species to rebel. Either way, conquering Earth was becoming the most expensive decision the Empire had made in centuries. There's one more thing, sire, Vexter said quietly. Our long-range reconnaissance has detected industrial activity in uninhabited systems throughout the region. Energy signatures consistent with ship construction. Someone is building a fleet in secret, slowly, invisibly. We believe it's humans using facilities we didn't know existed. How large a fleet? Valtros asked. Unknown. Our current estimate is 20 to 30 vessels over the next 5 years. Not enough to challenge our military superiority, but enough to conduct raids, inspire resistance movements, and generally make occupation more costly. Valtros stood and walked to a viewing window overlooking his capital city. 8,000 years. 47 species conquered. An empire that spanned a significant portion of the galaxy. And now, one stubborn species was forcing him to reconsider everything. Calculate the cost of withdrawing from Earth, he said. His advisors looked shocked. Sire, we've never withdrawn from a conquered world, Lord Vexter protested. It would show weakness. Other species might rebel if they think the Empire can be forced to retreat. And if we stay? Valtros asked. If we spend the next century bleeding resources to maintain occupation, while humans spread resistance tactics to every species we've conquered. Calculate both scenarios. I want hard numbers. 2 weeks later, the analysis was complete. Withdrawing from Earth would cost prestige and might encourage limited unrest among other conquered species. Staying would cost resources, military strength, and potentially destabilize the entire empire as resistance spread. Captain Jiwoo received an encrypted message from Yunseo's resistance cell on Earth. The Calrith had opened negotiations. Not demands, not threats. Actual negotiations about terms for mutual recognition and withdrawal. She sat in her captain's chair aboard the Phoenix, thinking about her parents on Mars, about the Horizon and her crew who had died in the first battle. About 1 billion humans now living under alien occupation. They're going to withdraw, J1 said, reading the message. We won. Not yet, Jiwoo cautioned. They're talking about withdrawal. That's not the same as actually leaving. But it's a start. 5 years after the conquest began, Calrith forces began a phased withdrawal from Earth. The official explanation was that Earth had achieved sufficient integration and no longer required occupation-level forces. Everyone knew the truth. The Calrith Empire, which had never lost a war in 8,000 years, had decided that conquering humanity cost more than humans were worth. The withdrawal took another 2 years. Piece by piece, Calrith forces left human space. They left behind administration buildings, equipment, and a treaty recognizing Earth as a sovereign power within the broader galactic community. Captain Jiwoo, no longer hiding in the Orc cloud, returned to Earth aboard the Phoenix. She was greeted as both a ghost and a hero. The woman who supposedly died defending Earth had actually spent 7 years building the resistance that made occupation impossible. Admiral Taeyang, now elderly and retired, met her at the landing pad. "You did it," he said simply. "You saved humanity." "I didn't save anyone," Jiwoo replied. "I just made it too expensive for them to destroy us." "That's not the same thing." "Close enough," Taeyang said with a smile. Jiwoo was appointed as Earth's first ambassador to the Galactic Council. When asked her official title, she thought for a moment and then smiled. "Ambassador of Last Resorts. Let the galaxy know what happens when you corner humanity." The Calrith Empire still existed, still powerful, still controlling much of the galaxy. But they negotiated now. They sought diplomatic solutions. They calculated costs before committing forces, because humanity had taught them the most expensive lesson in their 8,000-year history. Some species can't be conquered. They can only be contained. And even containment comes at a price that eventually, inevitably, becomes too high for any empire to pay. In the years that followed, 3 more conquered species achieved independence using tactics humans had taught them. The Calrith Empire didn't collapse, but it stopped expanding. For the first time in millennia, they faced a galaxy where conquered species believed resistance was possible. Captain Jiwoo stood in her office overlooking Earth, looking up at the stars. Somewhere out there, humans were teaching other species how to resist, how to fight asymmetrically, how to make victory meaningless. Not because humans were particularly noble or generous, simply because the Calrith had made one critical mistake. They had threatened Earth. They had forced humanity to remember every lesson learned in 10,000 years of fighting themselves. They had awakened something the galaxy had never seen before. A species that knew every dirty trick, every ruthless strategy, every way to win by making the other side wish they'd never started the fight. The Calrith Empire had come to conquer humanity. Instead, they discovered what humans do when cornered. And that discovery changed the galaxy forever. Asterisk.